Hello, today I'd like to talk about the basic organization of the nervous system. So the nervous system is an organ system that allows the body to detect changes both in the environment and inside the body, process this information, and react to these changes very quickly. So the nervous system is all about reacting to important stimuli quickly, but it's expensive. That's the one kind of drawback of the nervous system, is that it does require a lot of energy, but at least it's fast, which is important. So with any nervous system in any organism, it's going to have three major jobs. It's going to need to be able to sense changes in the environment. It's going to need to be able to process and make sense of these changes. And then it's going to need to be able to respond to these changes. All right. So, think about it. If you have an organism that can't do one of these three things, it's not going to be very successful. Imagine there's like some creature that has a really smart brain. He's got a bunch of different muscles that allow him to move around, but he can't see, hear, smell, or feel. He's not going to be doing a very good job of finding a mate or food or shelter. So you really need to have all three of these things in order to be successful. Another kind of example, imagine there's an animal that can sense changes in the environment really well. He can see really well, smell really well, feel things really well. He's got a super smart big brain, but he's got no ability to move. So he can't respond. Again, he's not going to be very successful in that environment. Okay? So, let's talk about which parts of the nervous system kind of accomplish these three goals or these three jobs. The part of the nervous system that's responsible for processing information, that's going to be accomplished by the brain and the spinal cord. And the brain and the spinal cord, that makes up the central nervous system. So CNS is an abbreviation for central nervous system, and that is composed of the brain and the spinal cord. Okay. Now, every other part of the nervous system that's not associated with the brain and spinal cord, these are all the other nerves that send information to and from the brain. Those all make up the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system has two different parts. It has a sensory kind of division or part. So that consists of nerves that are sending information to the brain. That's why we'll draw kind of an arrow that looks like that. And then the other part of the peripheral nervous system, those consist of nerves that are taking information away from the brain. Motor nerves is another name for them. So this is another part of the peripheral nervous system, and that is also, that is sending information away to the brain, to things like muscles and glands and all that kind of thing. All right, well, let's start with the peripheral nervous system, or the sensory division of the peripheral nervous system. And again, these consist of nerves that are sending information about changes in the environment to the brain so that the brain can process it. Now, this all starts with a series of really important cells that have the job of converting some change in the environment, whether it's like light or sound or smell, into a language that the brain can understand or that the nervous system can understand. And that language exists in the form of electrical signals. So we need to change some type of stimulus, such as a photon of light or some sound wave, into an electrical signal. That's the job of these individual cells called receptors. We have a couple of different types of receptors, and they're each specific to a different type of stimulus. For example, photoreceptors, these are the little cells in your retina that convert light into an electrical signal. Thermoreceptors, these are receptors in your skin that will convert heat into an electrical signal. It allows us to detect whether or not something is cold or hot. Mechanoreceptors, these guys respond to force. And so mechanics is like the study of force. Mechanoreceptors, these are receptors that respond to force. This gives us our sense of touch. And it's actually quite simple. You'll just have cells that lie inside of our skin, mostly the dermis. When some force presses on our skin, it disturbs these receptors, which kickstarts an electrical signal, which is sent to the brain through nerves. Nociceptors are really important. These are receptors that allow us to feel pain. Pain, you might think of this as a bad thing, but it's actually like a really valuable thing for the body because it allows the body to understand when there's a problem. Think about it. If you were to break your ankle and you couldn't feel pain, you'd probably continue to walk around on that ankle because you wouldn't know what was wrong. That would be bad because it would not only cause more damage, but it would prevent the ankle from healing. So nociceptors allow the brain to understand and the body to understand when there is a problem so that we could potentially fix that problem. Okay. Proprioceptors, these are also another type of very important receptor. These are little stretch receptors that lie in our muscles that give the brain information about the position and the length of each of our muscles at any given point in time. A lot of these proprioceptors are completely subconscious, so we're not really aware of this. But they're crucially important because they tell the brain really important information about where our limbs are at any given time. This is not something we're aware of, but the brain uses this to coordinate and kind of fine-tune future motor commands. I mean, think about it. You can walk up the steps while drinking a cup of coffee and talking to your friend, and you don't fall over. Think about all the sophisticated motor commands that are associated with that. That's all made possible by information from proprioceptors, because the brain knows exactly where each one of your feet are in space, in addition to your hands, in addition to kind of even the muscles of your tongue and your mouth, so that you can coordinate all these movements. When your foot goes asleep, that's basically you've squeezed one of the main nerves in your leg, and you've prevented that from acting kind of effectively, or you've prevented it from sending information correctly right after you kind of get up. If you sit in one position for too long, you know how hard it is to walk? Well, mainly because a lot of the information that the brain is receiving from those proprioceptors, it's not getting that information because that nerve that delivers the information from the proprioceptor to the brain is no longer functioning. Or not just for a few seconds, it's not functioning. And that is why, or one of the reasons it's so difficult to walk around when your legs are asleep. Chemoreceptors, these are specialized cells that encode information from chemicals. So this gives us our sense of taste and smell. It's pretty simple. These are just cells that detect the presence of a certain chemical, like the taste buds that allow us to taste something salty. They respond to the presence of sodium. Like when we eat something salty, sodium chloride, you're going to have that salt in your mouth. Chemoreceptors fire, and they're going to send a signal to the brain. It's worth mentioning that our sense of hearing is afforded by mechanoreceptors, because the sound waves that are in the air or fluid, right, they'll go into our ear and they will literally physically disturb these little special mechanoreceptors called hair cells, which allow us to hear. So what will happen is that all of these receptors are then going to be connected to a nerve cell that will send that information to the brain. So that's where I'm going to draw this kind of green arrow that sends the information to the brain so that the brain can process and make sense of this information. The name of the nerves that send information to the brain, those are called afferent nerves. A-F-F-E-R-E-N-T. Okay, these afferent nerves send it to the brain processes the sensory information, and then it's going to send out a motor command through kind of the motor division of the peripheral nervous system. So we'll just kind of say this division of the peripheral nervous system is motor. Well, the nerves that send this information away from the brain to things like muscles and glands, those are called efferent nerves. E-F-F-E-R-E-N-T. Efferent nerves. Now, this motor division of the peripheral nervous system is divided up into a couple of different parts. One of the parts, these consist of motor commands that we can consciously control. If we can consciously control a motor command, so this is like your ability to move around, walk around, talk, where you look, those are all things that are under our conscious control. Well, that's part of the somatic nervous system. Okay, so somatic nervous system. And the somatic nervous system is only going to control skeletal muscles. So if it's something you can consciously control, you're activating the somatic nervous system and you are controlling skeletal muscles. And that's it. Another part of the motor division of the peripheral nervous system, that is going to consist of the autonomic nervous system. I'll do this in orange. So autonomic nervous system. These are motor commands that we don't have conscious control over. So these happen automatically and behind the scenes. The types of tissues that the autonomic nervous system is going to stimulate, that's going to be cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands, because these are things that just happen automatically. So, cardiac, smooth muscle. So, I mean, you can't tell your heart to beat at 200 beats per minute right now. And then in the smooth muscle that you'll find in places like your gut, you can't tell your small intestine to move some food to your large intestine like right now. These things happen automatically because they're part of the autonomic nervous system. Another thing that it'll control are glands. So conscious control is the somatic nervous system, unconscious control is the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is then composed of two different parts. The two different parts that make up the autonomic nervous system is the parasympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic nervous system. And then the other part is the sympathetic nervous system. And these are two components of the autonomic nervous system. So, sympathetic nervous system. We'll talk about this in much more detail later on, but the parasympathetic nervous system is going to be most active when you're really relaxed. The nickname for him is the rest and digest nervous system. Okay, he's going to stimulate things like your stomach and your digestive tract. It's going to slow heart rate down. Where the sympathetic nervous system is called your fight or flight response, and that's going to be much more active when you're very stressed. So this is kind of a general roadmap of the overall organization of the nervous system. Now, another way to kind of think about this is we can kind of trace it out by looking at the individual cells that make up all of these systems. So, for example, if we start at receptors, now again, these are the cells that detect changes in the environment. Let's say we'll start out with a mechanoreceptor that detects pressure. This could be a little cell that, I don't know, kind of looks like this. It could be like a Pacinian corpuscle or something, some type of cell that's hanging out in your dermis that responds to pressure. When this guy is stimulated, he's going to trigger an electrical response in an afferent neuron that's going to send information to the brain. That's part of the sensory division of the peripheral nervous system. So we'll have this afferent neuron here. It's going to send information to the brain like this. Okay, it'll have a little cell body that looks like that. And this guy is going to send his information in that direction. Then when it reaches the brain, it's going to connect to brain or the spinal cord. It's going to connect to another series of neurons that are going to process this information. If we keep things simple, I'm just going to draw this as one neuron or one nerve cell. So that's going to represent the neuron that receives and processes that information in the spinal cord or the brain. Then that neuron is going to connect to another motor neuron, which is going to send that information to a muscle. All right, let's say we're stimulating a skeletal muscle or something like that. So then we're going to have an efferent motor neuron, which sends the information outside of the brain, where it connects to, let's say, a series of muscle fibers. This could be a motor unit, right? So here's a series of muscle fibers that make up a motor unit. We're back from AMP1. This neuron's probably going to branch like this, and it's going to stimulate all those muscle fibers, and that's kind of how it works. Now, to review, this signal kind of travels in this direction, and that's kind of how it works. Thanks.